wouldn't say it's a huge deal. I think that overall inflation is going to overshadow that in the minds of voters. But a half percentage point is, it's pretty big deal for any candidate. Usually what you see with presidential candidates in election years, you want to see rate cuts if you're the incumbent. If you're in office, it means more investment. The stock market typically goes up. So of course it's going to be a big deal for her. But again, like just how far rates have gone up over the past few years, a half percentage point is, there's still a long ways to go. So it's gonna take some time to get back down to the normal levels.
Welcome to Reporter's Notebook, where we talk to the Washington Examiner's top journalists about the stories breaking on their beats. I'm Jim Antle, and I'm joined today by economics reporter Zach Halaschak. Zach, the Federal Reserve gave us big news on interest rates this week. What was it?
Huge news. It's the first time the Fed finally cut rates for the first time since 2020, when it initially slashed rates to like near zero levels because of the pandemic. Since then, they, for about 2 years or so, they kept rates flat, and then they've been ramping them up the last 2 years or so. And rates got very high, the highest since really the turn of the century. And now the Fed finally, basically in some sense, declared that the inflation problem is not that big of a problem anymore. And so they're more concerned now about the labor market. The jobs market is showing some softening. And so they opted to go with not just a normal 25 basis point rate cut, but like a whole half percentage point rate cut. And what was interesting about that, it was not expected in some way. So usually before these Fed decisions, it's pretty well telegraphed what the Fed's going to do. Investors kind of are pretty sure what's going to happen.
Right.
This time it was basically evenly split between investors think they're going to do a quarter percentage point cut or a half percentage point cut, and Fed opt for the bigger cut, which is a huge deal.
So this has got to be really good news for people trying to buy a house as well.
Sure, yeah. I mean, again, people kind of knew there was going to be a cut, but not by how much. So mortgage rates have started falling over the past few weeks in anticipation of this. But now that they've gone with the bigger cut, I expect mortgage rates are going to go down even more. They're over 8% at their peak late last year, and now we're to I think 6.11% is the last thing I saw. So they're coming down, and that's a huge relief for consumers who are already shackled with inflation trying to go out and buy a house. It's just made everything more expensive.
And obviously potentially a huge relief for Vice President Harris, who's running for president, defending more or less the current state of the economy. I
mean, yeah, sure. I mean, I wouldn't say it's a huge deal. I think that overall inflation is going to overshadow that in the minds of voters. But a half percentage point is, it's pretty big deal for any candidate. Usually what you see with presidential candidates in election years, you want to see rate cuts if you're the incumbent. If you're in office, it means more investment. The stock market typically goes up. So of course it's going to be a big deal for her. But again, like just how far rates have gone up over the past few years, a half percentage point is, there's still a long ways to go. So it's gonna take some time to get back down to the normal levels.
So we saw a pretty big tax policy shift from former President Donald Trump, the Republican nominee for president this year. What was it?
Yeah, so as part of the 2017 Trump tax cuts, they capped deductions on state and local taxes paid, and at $10,000. That was called the SALT cap. If you hear SALT cap, that's what they're referring to. And Republicans are a fan of that because many Republicans, I should say, in like rural states, because it kind of is, the cap is like for high tax like states, like
more liberal states,
like New York. So you have like the New York Republicans, some of the California Republicans who have been very adamant about like raising this cap or completely eliminating it.
Right.
But as part of the Trump tax cuts, like Trump was the one who put that $10,000 cap in place.
Sure.
And then the other day, kind of out of the blue, he just said, I'm going to give SALT relief for these people. So it's a pretty big reversal for him to come out and say that. And so we don't know the exact details of what that'll entail. But I think it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out next year when we're in the fiscal debate, overextending the Trump tax cuts and that sort of thing. And it'll be curious to see how it shakes out now that Trump's kind of thrown his support behind that.
You're right. I mean, it's a small section of the House Republican Conference, but maybe an important group in terms of maintaining control of the House.
Exactly. And there's this group of maybe 7 or 8 Republicans, 10 Republicans or so. Depending on how big if Republicans win, depending on how big of a majority they have, they can vote as a bloc. And they actually have in the past. They call themselves the SALT caucus, and
Right.
they've used that like block to stop legislation, to hold up legislation, and to kind of like demand that there is some form of SALT relief. So yeah, it's a big deal, and it's going to be interesting to see how many of those members win re-election this year, because a lot of them are in very vulnerable seats.
Everybody's looking for a different kind of SALT diet. Thank you, Zach.
That's right. Yep.
You can read Zach and the rest of our policy team's coverage at washingtonexaminer.com.